Okay, before we start this video, there are some things that you're gonna need to make your peace with right off the bat. First of all, I've never played the Prince of Persia games. Second of all, I used to be obsessed with the Assassin's Creed games. I hate the Assassin's Creed movie starring Michael Fassbender. I love the Prince of Persia movie starring Jake Gyllenhaal. I will be using the full title Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time every time for humor reasons, and I will be making a case for why the Prince of Persia movie should be the Assassin's Creed movie. This video is probably going to be a little bit of a mess, but I think we're going to have a lot of fun with it. And thanks to my greatest YouTube inspiration, Jenny Nicholson, I have organized this video into a numbered list. I don't actually think it's a list of anything, but it is a list. Number one, why do I love this dumb movie? And is 50% of the reason Jake Gyllenhaal's arms? Look, video game movies are almost inevitably disappointing because long form interactive narratives don't necessarily translate to the short form, relatively speaking, narrative structure of film. Even if the elevator pitch of the game's plot sounds like it would make a good movie, there's just something to video games that doesn't translate well to the big screen. In fact, I'm pretty sure this is why HBO's The Last of Us series is the only video game adaptation that has been really beloved across the board by video game fans and normies alike. What? They made a second season that everyone hated? It's like the executives at every single production company have become infected with some kind of airborne virus or spore that takes over their brain and makes them indefinitely pursue one target only: money. Anyway, really, what it boils down to is you'll never be able to make every fan of the original property happy, so you should just set out to make something enjoyable. And man, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time is a really enjoyable movie. And not just because of Jake Gyllenhaal's arms. I mean, they do a lot of the heavy lifting, both figuratively and literally. But still, it's not just that. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time was made by the same team at Disney that made the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and you can really tell. It's got the same sense of humor. And you have to remember that this was in 2010, before the Pirates movies got completely terrible. Like, the first one was incredible. There is no argument to be had about that. And the next two were fine. Not great, but fine. And then the two after that were really bad. But the point is, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time came out before they got really terrible. I do have some criticisms of the characters and the performances, but we'll get to that. Overall, I think that everybody gave it 110%. And if you watched my video on Constantine, you'll know that it's my opinion that these kinds of movies really only work when everyone involved, from the actors to the crew, is completely invested in what they're doing. And I really think that these people were. And I know in 2019, Jake Gyllenhaal, denounced this movie or said it wasn't right for him or whatever, but I disagree, and that's fine. People can have their opinions on stuff. I'm not going to tell him how to feel, but he can't tell me how to feel either. However, unlike my Constantine video, in which I was really just spilling straight from the heart the entire time, for this video, I decided to actually look into it a little bit. And I'm not going to dwell on this for too long because you're not here to listen to me read an IMDb page to you. But there were just a few little nuggets that I thought were kind of cool, and I wanted to mention them here because they do add to my enjoyment of the movie. This first one is my favorite, I think. In 2010, Gemma Arterton also portrayed Io in Clash of the Titans. In Greek mythology, Io is the great 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 grandmother of Perses, who is not only the son of Perseus and Andromeda, but is said to be an ancestor of the emperors of Persia, and from whose name Persia is derived. The protagonist, played by Jake Gyllenhaal's name, is Dastan, and so I found out that Dastan is an ornate form of oral history from Central Asia, Iran, Turkey, and Azerbaijan. A Dastan is generally centered on one individual who protects his tribe or his people from an outside invader or enemy, although only occasionally can this figure be traced back to a historical person. As for this last one, the first half delighted me. At the first UK screening at the Disney Roadshow, director Mike Newell stated that, as he had known Jake Gyllenhaal since he was 7 years old, he had always wanted him for the part. Then the second half made me want to throw up. He went on to say that he selected Gemma Arterton because of how very old seeing the back of her beautiful neck made him feel. Anyway, I'm a person who really enjoys watching like choreographed sword fights and athletic stunts and acrobatics and all that kind of stuff. I understand that maybe that sort of thing is boring to you, and this movie might not be your cup of tea. That's okay. Plus, I have to admit that I'm a really big fan of the whole enemies to lovers trope in romance stories. So, because this has a little bit of that going on, I'm totally a sucker for it. Also, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time has a score of 6.5 out of 10 on IMDb, and I find that unforgivable. Just saying. With all that being said, I do understand that it is not the most faithful adaptation of the Prince of Persia video games. And speaking of unfaithful adaptations, number two, why is the Assassin's Creed movie? Say what you want about the repetitive mechanics of the first Assassin's Creed game, no one can deny that game was a banger. Altair is such an interesting character, and you don't even get his whole story in the game. For his entire story, I highly recommend reading this book. But that's not even to say anything of the setting. It's set during like the Third Crusade, King Richard's crusade, the most famous crusade. It has the whole conflict between the Order of Assassins and the Knights Templar. Why wouldn't you use that setting? But fine, if they didn't want to do Altair's story, then Assassin's Creed 2 has the most loved protagonist out of the entire series, so much so that they made an entire two extra games for him. Now, to be charitable, the vibe of the existing Assassin's Creed movie, it clearly was going for something more serious. And maybe they felt that Ezio's energy wouldn't really match with the more serious tone they were going for. Fine. Moving on to Assassin's Creed 3. I really love Assassin's Creed 3. Put the gun down. I agree that the gameplay is really meandering, especially in the early hours, and Connor isn't as strong of a protagonist as Ezio was, which I think the contrast of them coming one after the other made that seem even stronger. Either way, I personally really enjoyed Connor Kenway as a character, so much so that I actually did a cosplay of him. And all right, so maybe the executives thought that it would be a bit of a touchy subject to cover the story of a half Native American boy set in the time period of the American Revolution. Like, I kind of get it. So let's move on. People really loved Assassin's Creed Black Flag, but I'm not sure that there's actually enough there to make a movie. The thing that really captivated people about that game was the sailing mechanic. It was really fun and it allowed you to do a bunch of things that the other games had really restricted you for, which is namely exploring. So I worry that without the active involvement of actually doing the sailing yourself, it's kind of a pretty straightforward pirate story, and I'm not sure that the executives would think it was distinct enough from Pirates of the Caribbean to do that. Plus, let's face it, we already had quite enough pirate ruining done by the Disney execs. We didn't need them taking on Edward Kenway either. We're not going to talk about Assassin's Creed Unity today. We're just not. I personally bought the collector's edition of the game because that was right in the peak of my total hyperfixation on it, and I was just hungry for anything Assassin's Creed. But the main character, Arlo, Armand, boy, it's probably bad I can't remember his name. The point is, clearly there was not a good story there, and so we're just gonna skid right past it. As for Assassin's Creed Syndicate, I loved it. I love the characters, I love the setting. Peaky Blinders, anyone? But I do understand that people were pretty harsh on Ubisoft making the same game over and over and over. And if only they knew how much longer Ubisoft would keep making that same game, those sweet summer children. Anyways, by that point, there was a lot of fatigue with Assassin's Creed, so I think Syndicate wasn't received that well, but I really liked it. I liked the mechanics of the dual protagonists and being able to sort of customize them to make them more useful on different types of missions. All that being said, I don't think Syndicate would be a very good premise for a movie. Maybe for a show, though. I think Jacob and Evie would be pretty interesting dual protagonists, no? I'm bringing you through all of these games because these were the games that were available when the Assassin's Creed movie came out. Okay, there were some for handhelds. I didn't play them, so let's just say from 1 to Syndicate. There was so much source material available, and the Assassin's Creed movie chose to use none of it. They chose none of it. They just set it during the Spanish Inquisition, which, like, fine, I guess that's a good setting, but, like, why invent a new setting when you already had 6 settings to choose from? If you're not familiar with the Assassin's Creed games, something that I failed to mention is that between Assassin's Creed 1 and Assassin's Creed 3, there was this overarching present day storyline in which a character named Desmond Miles is taken by this evil company called Abstergo and put into the spooky machine called the Animus. And the machine allows him to go into basically the memories of his ancestors. Abstergo is looking for a holy grail type treasure, if you will, and they need Desmond Miles because he has the DNA of the people who were there when the treasure was hidden, kind of thing. So, even though the time spent playing as Desmond in each of the games is fairly minimal, with a bigger chunk in 1 and in 3 because of the beginning and end, nobody liked playing as Desmond. The bulk of the game was set in the past with the cool assassin character, and that's the part that people liked. No one, and I mean no one, liked the Desmond Miles parts. Even the biggest fans of the franchise know that the Desmond Miles parts are just like a chore while you're trying to get to the real good storyline. So I'm sure you can imagine our complete bafflement when apparently somewhere some executive in charge of the Assassin's Creed movie apparently said, hey, you know that part of the first 3 games that everyone hated, and in fact, that we literally took out of future games because it was so unpopular? Let's make the entire movie about that. And then apparently, some other executives were like, yeah, that's a great idea. Awesome. Let's do it. Man, can you tell that this was a franchise that was near and dear to my heart? And then the company stomped on it, and I'm still eating sour grapes about it. I feel like I was hiding it really well. Let's move on. Number 3, the plot of Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, as it is. So, if you didn't know, in the Prince of Persia games, the protagonist is unnamed. You can get away with that in video games, but since it's kind of harder to do that with a movie, they name our main character Dastan. The movie opens with some on screen text and some narration, which is actually totally fine because in a fantasy setting, you often have to get the audience caught up to the world and the establishing powers of that world very quickly. So I'm okay with it. My question, though, is why they felt like they had to show any part of Dastan's childhood in, like, the movie. Like, the voiceover literally explains what you're watching, so why couldn't the voiceover just have been over some B-roll and then we could have skipped that and gotten right into the good part of the plot? And considering that Aladdin is like tied for my first favorite animated Disney movie, even I'm a little bit surprised that I'm opting to cut this scene because, like, it's literally basically just one jump, the song from early in the movie. Compare the two together, I promise you, they're the same scene. And then, boom, time skip forward. Here is where we meet Dastin's two brothers, the blood heirs to the throne, Tuss the elder, and Garsif the middle. The Prince brothers have got kind of a three bears thing going on. Like, Tuss is calm and wise, Garciv is angry and impulsive, and then Dastan is just right. We also meet their uncle Nizam, played by Sir Ben Kingsley, and he is showing Tuss that a spy of theirs intercepted a shipment of weapons to their enemies. It's very vague, but basically he's saying that the city of Alamut that is supposed to be on their side has been making weapons for their enemies. So, without the king's knowledge, because their father is still alive, Tuss goes ahead and organizes a military raid on the city of Alamut. So I had actually assumed that Alamut was a made-up place like Agrabah, but I'm kind of dumb. I'm not the brightest tool in the shed. Wait, I don't think that was right. Anyways, Alamut is a real historical place. In fact, the real life leader of the real life Order of Assassins was Hassan al-Sabah, and he was also known as Hassan the First of Alamut. I also learned that the mountain fortress called Alamut Castle was referenced in the writings of Marco Polo. If I'm not mistaken, this area is currently known as the Alborz Mountains in northern Iran. It's a little funny that in Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, there is a group of characters based on the Order of Assassins. They call them the Hassan Sins, and they're not the people who live in Alamut. The people who live in Alamut are like clergy and nobles, and the Hassan Sins are. We're gonna get there. In Alamut, we meet our romantic interest, Tamina, and through an exchange with one of her priests, we get a very heavy handed line where she says, "Everything changes with time." Foreshadowing his literary device. And then Dastan, as our dashing rogue, decides to disobey Tassingarsif's plan to sneak into Alamut over the wall from the back. This is where we get our first really awesome video game stylized sequence. First, Dastan runs up a log to get onto a wall that his men are moving, and then he climbs up said wall while his men are in the bushes shooting from these mechanical crossbows, I guess arrows that can break into concrete. And so as he's climbing the castle walls, it's like they're shooting the things that he's climbing at the same time. It's really cool. Then there's an even more video game looking sequence when Dastin's friend Biz, who seems to be like a general or something, is telling him about all the different places that they have to get past and or the obstacles that are in their way, gates and soldiers and stuff. And we get this really cool like little like zoom around sequence where, like in a video game, they would show you where all the goals are at the beginning of the level. Fun Jake Gyllenhaal parkour scene. We cut back to Tamina, and her people tell her that the Persian army has breached the first wall. So she tells them all to leave and collapse the tunnels behind them so that they can safeguard the sacred thing. We, as the audience, know that this is the special dagger that turns back time, but they haven't quite clarified it yet. This is where we get one of the most beautiful shots of the entire movie, and apparently it actually was a direct homage to Assassin's Creed. It's this gorgeous shot of Dastan climbing up the tallest tower and then standing at the top and sort of getting his bearings, and the camera swings around and does a big full 360. This is a staple of the Assassin's Creed games, and I really like that they used it in this particular instance because it really sets the mood of the rest of the movie. And it's very useful for me to make my case that this movie should be the Assassin's Creed movie. Unfortunately, beyond what I've already mentioned, we don't get a ton more video game stylization. Like, we get a few sequences through the movie, obviously, but they're not quite as nice as these ones. I kind of suspect that this movie's budget was front and back loaded, so like all the money went into the very beginning and the very end. And Dastan kind of unceremoniously gets the dagger while a guard is escaping with it, trying to take it out of the city so that they can't get their hands on it. It's like comical almost, like they're fighting and it just falls out of his coat. Tamina's clergy did not, in fact, collapse the tunnels behind them, though, and so all three princes march into those sacred chambers to meet with her. Tuss basically offers to make an allegiance with them by joining their two kingdoms in marriage. Tamina refuses. Tuss says to kill her, which, like, rude. That's when she notices that the dagger is tucked into Dastan's pants, and so she quickly changes her mind and agrees to marry Tuss and says, as long as my people are safe and unharmed, I'll do whatever you want. So, celebration, yay! Unfortunately for the princes, when their father, the standing king, arrives, he scolds them, especially Tuss. He says he's clearly not ready to be king, and this was brash and ridiculous, and now he's going to have to smooth things over with all of their allies because Alama is this very sacred city. So I guess there's apparently some custom with like a victory where the youngest son has to give the father a gift when there's a success. Look, it's all a really contrived reason for Tuss to give Dastan a gift to give to their father, which is like the high priest's robe. So they're having their victory party, and the king calls Dastan the Lion of Persia because, he was the one who breached the wall to let the rest of the army in, and he was the one who disobeyed, Tuss's plan to do the thing that would result in fewer lives lost. And this is the quality the king says that makes for a great king. And he says this little speech of, I saw a boy who wasn't noble of blood, but his character was a king in spirit. Do you like my king voice? Dastan gifts his father the robe that Tuss snuck to him, and then he introduces Tamina and asks his father to bless her marriage to Tuss. And in what I think is a great line, the king is like, I think Tuss has enough wives. He goes on to say that Dastan has no wives, and maybe if he had a beautiful woman to come home to, he wouldn't do such risky stuff. So the king decrees that the Princess of Element shall marry his youngest son, Dastan. But wait, all of a sudden, the king is freaking out. The robe is smoking. It seems to be burning him. What's going on? It seems that the robe has burned him to death. I think the implication is that it was some kind of acidic poison because when the guards try to pull it off of him, their hands are also burned. Of course, because everyone saw Dastan gift the robe to him, they all immediately blame Dastan for his murder and chaos. Tamina helps him escape the ensuing chaos, and then they sneak out through some tunnels and out into the night. We, as the audience, know that she's actually helping him because he has the dagger and she can't let it out of her sight. They escape out into the desert, and right away, Tamina is trying to seduce him, to trick him. She does a kiss fake out in order to be able to grab a sword from the other side of the horse and actually does some pretty cool fighting moves. There's an awesome choreography where she actually like jumps over the fire and stuff. I really liked it. And now we finally get the Sands of Time money shot. Dustin presses the dagger and time begins to rewind. The second time around, Tamina successfully gets the sword and successfully cuts him because he's all in a daze trying to figure out what the heck just happened. And then finally, on the third time around, he manages to stop her before she grabs the sword, and he's like, don't do that again. And she's like, again. And then she looks at the dagger and sees that the little container part is empty and realizes what he's done. It's at this point that Dastan, assuming that Tuss killed his father, realizes that he must have lied about the weapons forges and is actually looking for the Sands of Time. But I don't know, you guys. I mean, Tuss isn't on the DVD cover, so somehow I doubt that he's our main villain. So they're walking through the desert, and Tamina decides to trick Dastan again. This time, she fake faints, which does succeed in getting him to run over to check on her. And when he bends down, she clonks him on the head with like a huge Flintstonesy animal bone. Look, this movie is not perfect, but look, she succeeds, and Dastan is not dead. When Dastan comes to, he is surrounded suddenly by a group of vicious bandits led by Shikamar, and we're going to talk about the problems with Shikamar later in the video. Right now, let's just focus on the fact that he is the main comic relief, apart from Dastan's sass. Cut back to Tamina in the sprawling desert, and then out of nowhere, all these horses appear, and she's suddenly surrounded by masked men with swords looking very vicious. And then one pulls down his headscarf, and it's Dastan. Yay! I wish Jake Gyllenhaal would save me from something. We learn through some dialogue implications that Dastan has convinced the bandits to not turn him in for the bounty on his head put out by his brothers in exchange for Tamina. They all go back to this bandit hideout, and there's spooky skeletons on pikes outside the walls, and everyone's all like, oh, this is the place where, murderers and the worst of the worst have come to live. All these spooky, scary rumors about all the vicious bandits in this area. When we get inside the walls, we see that this bandit hideout is actually more like a very tiny Las Vegas, and the main form of gambling is ostrich races. Shikamar then admits to Dastan that he was the one who made up all the scary stories about the murderers and the vicious, bloodthirsty bandits, and he actually bought those skeletons off Romani, who was traveling through, and the reason that he does all of this is to avoid the greatest evil of all, taxes. Oh my god, I need to start going faster. We're only like halfway through this movie. So, after escaping Amar's hideout, Dastan tells Tamina that he has to go back to the city and talk to his uncle Ben Kingsley because he's the only one that Dastan can trust. He needs to tell him what Tess is really looking for in Alamut and make sure that doesn't happen. He realizes that they can sneak into the city more easily while his father's funeral is happening because foreign dignitaries from all over the place are coming. Tamina helps get him disguised by dressing them both up as the servants of a Hindu dignitary, and it's a pretty good scene. We also get another long-awaited Jake Gyllenhaal parkour scene when he has to run along some rooftops in order to jump into the funeral carriage, and that is so he can sneak a note into his uncle's pocket, which he does manage to do undetected. They meet up in secret, and at first, Ben Kingsley seems fairly sympathetic, although he does sort of doubt Dastan's story, especially when he starts talking about magic time traveling daggers and everything. But he gives him the benefit of the doubt and asks to see the dagger. Still fully trusting his uncle, Dastan hands over the dagger wrapped in a bundle of fabric, but when Nizam opens it, it's revealed to just be a nutcracker. Tamina made a switch, and she's gone. Dramatic gasp! As if that wasn't enough, it's at that very moment that Dastan notices his uncle's hands are burned. Nizam tries to explain it away by saying that he was trying to help pull the cloak off the king, but Dastan seems very suspicious of that. All of a sudden, an arrow flies by. The royal guard has shown up. Nizam called the cops on him. Second dramatic gasp! Finally, we get another fairly stylized video gamey sequence as the royal guards chase Dastan across the rooftops, and it's again sort of like Aladdin's one jump, but we actually get them using the fact that they're in a marketplace to do some fun acrobatics, swinging off stalls and stuff like that. It's another really enjoyable scene. Cut to Tuss and Nizam in a dark room. Nizam is trying to convince Tuss to not let Dastan have a public trial. He says that he's a traitor and that if he gets a chance to speak, he might convince the people to become restless with the king. But Tah says no. He wants to be a fair and just king who obeys the rule of the law. Must be nice, huh? Nizam agrees and praises Taz and says he's going to be a great king. But then there's a super sinister long zoom in close up on his face and dun, dun, dun. We cut to an exterior shot of the building and some text on the screen that says Lair of the Hasansins. And I mentioned them before, but yes, they are supposed to be based on the real life Order of Assassins, but they don't really behave like that or like they do in Assassin's Creed. They're kind of utilitarian for a specific purpose, but anyways, just take them as they are. Actually, if I'm not remembering incorrectly, I think this may actually be a bit anachronistic because I think the Order of Assassins had not yet been established in the time period during which this story is supposed to take place. But it's a video game fantasy setting, so shh. The lair of the Hassan Sins is very dark and spooky, and then you see Ben Kingsley walking through their training area, and all their weapons are very spooky, all projectiles, and all of them have scars and headscarves, and it's very, very scary. I don't know why I'm doing this voice, I'm sorry. Nizam goes to talk to the leader of the Hasansins, and I guess the idea is that they can go into some kind of trance. And in this trance, they can see visions of the future and visions of death, or they can just straight up find the location of people. So the leader of the Hasansins agrees to find Dastan for Ben Kingsley. That's right, Ben Kingsley has been the villain all along. Isn't that the most surprising twist you've ever heard? Meanwhile, Dastan tracks Tamina down in the desert, and they have to bunker down for a sandstorm because he's gonna help her. Of course he is. During the sandstorm, Dastan tells her about how he realized that it was Nizam who killed his father, not Tuss. He realized that his uncle never went near the robe after his father put it on, but he was the one who had handed it off to Tuss, so he must have handled it before. In return, Tamina tells Dastan a, I guess, religious parable. It's very Noah's Ark feeling, the story of the time glass and the sands of time. As the story goes, gods were angry with mankind for basically being evil, and they decided that they were going to send a great sandstorm to sweep all of mankind away. Like I said, very great flood. But one little girl went to the gods, and she offered her life in exchange for all of mankind. And the gods, reminded of the good that can also exist in man, decided to spare all of mankind. They swept all the sandstorm sands into this time glass that lives underneath Alamut, and they gave the little girl the dagger. We'll get back to that. Oh, she also mentions that the dagger is the only thing that can pierce the time glass. Also, I forgot to mention, but at some point, Dastan realized that Tamina was wearing a necklace that had more sand in it, and so they were able to refill the dagger. So that's important for what's coming up. So Tamina says that she needs to get back to Alamut because there's a place in the mountain fortress where she can hide the dagger safely. Unfortunately, along the way, they are discovered and captured again by Shikamar's bandits. And I didn't go into it for the sake of time, but basically, when they escaped from his hideout, they started a riot to make a distraction, and I guess it killed most of his ostriches, and he's really upset about that. So now he's angry and he wants to trade in Dastan for all that Persian gold. Then, at night, when everyone is asleep, the group is attacked by a bunch of vipers that are controlled by the Hassan Sins. Luckily for them, Seiso, who is a knife thrower from Sudan that owes Amar a life debt, he understands the seriousness of the situation, so when Dastan asks him to throw him the dagger, he just does it. Dastan hits the rewind button, if you will, and time reverses. That way, when the Vipers attack again, Dastan is able to do all these really cool moves because he knows exactly where they're all going to come from, and everybody's like How did you do that? Thank you for saving us. So they agree to release him and at least help them get to the hidden fortress in Alamut. Tamina also says that they can, have a bunch of gold, so that helps. Unfortunately, what the characters don't notice right away is that one of the vipers got away and it took the dagger with it by swallowing it. Yeah. Moving on. While they're writing, Dastan explains that the Hassansins basically used to be like SEAL Team 6 for the Persian Empire. But his father, the good, wise king, had them disbanded because he felt that it was improper for the Persian Empire to basically have a Black Ops team. Dastan therefore theorizes that Nizam kept them secretly and has been hiding them somewhere to be his own personal murder squad, which, yeah, but then they arrive at the fortress, and all the guards are already dead. Tamina runs inside. Everyone inside, all the priests, all the clergy, all dead. As if Dastan doesn't have enough on his plate, that's when Garsif shows up with a whole bunch of royal guards determined to catch him and make him pay. Fortunately, Dastan is able to use brotherly love to talk Garsif down from his crazy, angry, murderous rampage, and Garsif looks into his eyes and believes him. Then, before they can do anything, smoke bomb! Sanson strike. Garciv steps outside to see what's happening and is immediately shot with a bunch of those spiky things. It's like a metal spike with the sharp on both ends, and I think they're Japanese. Anyways, in this movie, the Hassansins have those like loaded into little guns on the back of their gloves. So instead of the like wrist knife, it's like projectiles that shoot out from the top of their fist. Sheikh Amar is happy with the amount of gold that was there and wants to get the heck out of Dodge before more Hassansins show up. But Seiso, who owed him a life debt, now feels that he owes Dastan a life debt because Dastan saved him during the altercation. When they get to Alamut City proper, Tamina speaks with some of the clergy who are still there, and they say that the dagger is in the place it was when we saw it at the beginning of the movie, but nobody can get within 20 feet of it without dying because it's being guarded by an invisible force. Say so, the knife thrower says some people don't need to get within 20 feet. We get a pretty cool fight scene here between Seiso and the Hassansin that's guarding the dagger. Yes, it was a Hassansin, not an invisible force. And like, it's nice that he does end up taking out the Hassansin and he manages to toss the dagger out the window before he realizes that he's been fatally hit as well. Sort of a mutually assured destruction sort of thing. Now that he's got the dagger, Dastan finally sneaks in to talk to Tuss to explain himself. He also explains the power of the dagger. Tuss is like, "What are you talking about?" But he says just to trust him, and then he stabs himself in the stomach and dies. But obviously, trusting Tuss to push the jewel on the dagger, he does. Dastan is very relieved that his brother actually believed him and uses that trust to basically relay the information that Nizam is behind their father's death. Sadly, it's pretty much right after this that Nizam comes into the room and realizing he's been made, slits Tuss's throat right there. Ben Kingsley sneaks away with the dagger while Dastan is busy fighting another Hassansin. When the Hassansin is dead, Tamina looks at his body and sees the tattoos on his hands that matched hers. Basically, she realizes that he was a priest, and that's how they knew to get to that hidden part of the mountain fortress and kill everyone there. Since it's obviously really important that they get the dagger back, Tamina is like, I know a secret way, and then they go into like a cave system underneath the city. And here is where we get another really awesome video game sequence. But notice how long it's been since I brought that up. In a secret room that leads to the time glass, Tamina steps on a plate, and then that sets off these little puffs of air underneath the sand that indicates to her where she needs to step to reach the end. So she tells Dastan, "You can only step where I step." It felt very like Indiana Jones to me. And they're walking carefully. She says that nothing else can touch the sand anywhere except for where she steps. I don't know, doesn't that part just kind of feel like a video game challenge? But oh no, Nizam has set up a mining operation right in the middle of Alamut to try to find the time glass, and because of all the digging, the ceiling of the cave is being rattled around, and rubble comes loose and falls onto the sand, and oh, now everything is collapsing. Again, very much like Aladdin when Abu touches anything but the lamp. This leads into one of the best scenes in the movie where Dastan is basically surfing on this big cascading wave of sand, and there's ruins falling down and rocks and everything. And he gets to a platform and he does a big backflip and he lands and he's jumping through the sand and he follows through a trapdoor. It's very, very video gamey. I really wish the rest of the movie had had this energy. It also feels pretty video gamey when he fights the leader of the Hassansins and he gets to do a bunch of like wall running and jumping moves, which again is like very Prince of Persia. Finally, they're struggling, they're, locked in mortal combat, and oh no, one of the Vipers is still alive, and it's coming out of the assassin's robes, and it's gonna strike Dastan, and then Tamina just grabs that snake and she sticks it right in the assassin's eye. Now for the face-off with the big bad, Nizam. Now, you would think that Jake Gyllenhaal, looking like this, would be able to beat Ben Kingsley looking like this. But it would be dramatic enough. Also, everyone is at a disadvantage because the cave is literally collapsing all around them, and Tamina runs in to help, but Nizam tosses her right over the ledge, and Dastan catches her, but Ben Kingsley's still got the dagger and he's about to go stab that time glass. So obviously Tamina is like, you have to let go. You have to go stop your uncle. He's going to unleash the apocalypse, basically. And I mean, she's like the romantic interest. Obviously, Dastan doesn't want to let her go. So she lets go of him and, he's sad and then he's furious and he runs, but he doesn't get there in time, and unfortunately, Ben Kingsley has managed to put the dagger right into the time glass and open up the jewel. The way Tamina explained it earlier in the movie was basically if you were to put the dagger into the time glass and open it, you would incur the wrath of the gods by letting the sand out. So as soon as Nizam does that, the giant dark clouds and sand tsunamis start rolling in towards the city, and it's utter devastation. But our hero, Dustin, manages to close the jewel and pull the dagger out and stops time from reversing. However, when he does this, it sends him all the way back to almost the beginning of the movie. Basically, right as they were victorious in taking over Alamut City. Since Dastan is the only one aware of the time change, he is able then to run into the crowd and find his brothers and, you know, explain that there are no forges in Alamut and they've been tricked, and actually there is no spy, and it was all Uncle Nizam. First, Nizam is like, what are you talking about? And like tries to play it off. But Dastan's truth powers are greater than his lie powers. I don't know. I guess it's by the power of brotherly love that Tuss and Garth have realized that Dastan is telling the truth and discovered Nizam again tries to kill Dastan. He grabs a sword, they have a fight. It's our last sort of like clash of the movie. Ultimately, Nizam is so fixated on killing Dastan that Tuss ends up having to kill him in order to protect Dastan. So after that, he apologizes to Dastan and then says that they all need to go to apologize to the princess together. Back in that sacred chamber where we first met Tamina, Tuss actually bows to her and apologizes, admits his mistake, says that they were misled. He would like to make it up to her by offering their allyship, of course, by joining their kingdoms in marriage. Only this time, he doesn't suggest himself. He suggests the Lion of Persia, Jake Gyllenhaal, I mean Dastan. So Dastan and Tamina get to meet again, and they take a walk down the beautiful halls of Alamut Castle, and it's just a really nice, cute, happy ending. But don't quit there, because we are not done yet. Number 4, how making the Prince of Persia movie into an Assassin's Creed movie is just objectively better. So I'm going forward with the idea that we're using the framing device of the first three Assassin's Creed games, so the present day storyline with Desmond Miles, because I actually think it's a good framing device. It just shouldn't be the whole movie. And what's great is we actually don't even have to change that much of the plot to make it work and make it better. Remember how I said that we should cut that part at the beginning that shows Dastin's childhood? Well, I think we should use that time in order to set up the Desmond Miles Abstergo thing. And yes, I really do believe that that little amount of time should be spent on it. So, pretty much the exact opposite of what the actual existing Assassin's Creed movie did. Since the dagger is a Holy Grail type treasure, we could actually swap it out for anything. And as luck would have it, in the Desmond Miles plotline of Assassin's Creed, they actually are having him look for a Holy Grail type treasure. So, see, it works really well. Next, the king's death scene. The whole poison rope thing needs to be swapped out for him just being poisoned with like a drink. Since at the beginning of the movie, Dastan is established as sort of a messy character or kind of a goofball, silly, it would make a lot of sense for him to spill wine on himself or have wine spilled on him, maybe by a girl. And then when he serves his father wine, it all adds up to make him look way more guilty than just like, here's a robe that turned out to be poisoned, even though I never took it out of the box that my brother gave it to me. And you know what I'm saying? It's just like, it objectively makes more sense to do it this way. Then, once Dastan is basically a disgraced prince out alone in the desert, he could be adopted by the Order of Assassins. Remember, I'm taking out the Assassins in this, okay? Unfortunately, this means that we have to cut out all the comedy of the bandit gang, but it does mean we have a huge opportunity for like awesome training montages and more character depth. Like, I do get that in the Prince of Persia games, that protagonist, the Prince of Persia, didn't really have a lot of characterization. He didn't even have a name. So why not make it an Assassin's Creed movie and give the character a chance to be a character that people actually care about? When Tamina gets them the disguises to sneak in with the funeral procession, that's perfect for Assassin's Creed because the game has a whole mechanic where you blend in with a crowd. Instead of Nizam just being an envious asshole who's hungry for power, which is kind of a mediocre villain goal, wouldn't it be cool if it were Assassin's Creed and the big reveal was that Nizam was secretly part of the Templar? Like, I just think that the whole idea of like the found family and then the second found family of the assassins and then finding out that Nizam is actually Templar, like that would just be so much like emotional betrayal. And at the point where we see the lair of the assassins, just swap that for a Templar hideout. It's that easy. Remember when they're out in the desert and Tamina is telling Dastan the story of the little girl who wanted to sacrifice herself in the sandstorm? Well, we could replace that entire segment with, wait, spoilers for the Desmond Miles storyline that concludes in Assassin's Creed 3, if you care. So, at the end of Assassin's Creed 3, we find out that it was aliens. It was aliens all along. I'm not saying it was the best ending, and I'm not even saying that I particularly liked it, but I'm working with what we have, okay? Anyways, I think that when Tamina is telling Dastan the story, she could be telling it in a way that it's like religious coded, you know, with the gods and everything. But visually, for us, the audience, it could totally be aliens with this magic power because honestly, what is the difference between aliens and a god if they're wielding that level of power, you know? It also makes more sense to me that the point in the movie, right after Tuss dies, when Tamina discovers that the Hassanson was actually a priest, well, I think it would work way better if instead of discovering the clergy tattoos, she discovered a Templar tattoo. Wouldn't that just like thread better into the overall greater storyline too? Straight up, change Dastan discovering Nizam's burned hands, which is lame and contrived, to him discovering Nizam has a Templar tattoo. Awesome. The horror, the betrayal. I think that all the ending action scenes can stay exactly the way they are. The only difference is that you would just have to replace the Sansons with another secondary enemy that works for Ben Kingsley. And certainly something with a richer story than just like ooh, the good and wise king decided that no more secret commandos. Like, there's got to be something better than that, right? We can even keep the whole hero gets sent back to the beginning of the movie ending if you want. I don't think we have to, but it would work out really well because alien powers, again, then that also perfectly describes why Abstergo would want Desmond Miles' character specifically, because someone who can commune with the aliens. Also, I'm just gonna say it, I love the name Altair, and I think the character's name should be Altair. Number 5. Problems within the existing Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time movie. Right away, let's just get to the core of the big problem that everybody is already aware of. Hollywood is racist. It is just exceedingly difficult for actors of color to be cast as characters who share their same racial or ethnic group. It's ridiculous, it's unfair. I'm not going to list off a bunch of examples because I'm certain that there are plenty of YouTubers who are of color who have more thought out perspectives than me. So, yeah, none of the main cast, like characters with any lines of substance, are Persian. Jake Gyllenhaal specifically is Swedenborgian on his father's side. Apparently, they're actually like related to nobility, and on his mother's side, he is Ashkenazi Jewish, descended from Russian and Polish immigrants. When I read that, I was like, oh gosh, like I don't even know if you can get whiter than that. But somehow, being Jewish, he is still the closest actor out of all of the main cast to like the ethnic group that is being portrayed in the movie. Gemma Arterton as Tamina, Kobe Kebbell as Garciv, and Richard Coyle as Tuss, all English actors, like UK born. Obviously, we all know that Sir Ben Kingsley is of English Indian descent, and Alfred Molina is Italian American. And speaking of Alfred Molina, Sheikh Amar. Oof. Look, I know earlier in the video I said that he was funny, and I do think that he's actually a pretty great character with his hatred of taxes and his love of ostriches. But I really wish they hadn't put Alfred Molina in brown face to play this role. Like, was he the only actor that they could have put in here? And like, I am not knocking his performance at all, okay? He gave it 110% just like everyone else. I'm absolutely knocking the casting director and the main director who really should have known better, especially considering the fact that when I looked up trivia about this movie, there was so much Mike Newell, the director, patting himself on the back for doing so much research about Middle Eastern cultures. My next gripe is a little less heavy, but still somewhat related, and that's that all of the actors are using what I've come to call the Game of Thronesian accent. It's just this like vague, unspecific, sort of posh English accent, like the one that Chris Hemsworth does when he's playing Thor. And yes, I have accepted that a lot of fantasy properties use this sort of like vague English accent to indicate that it's fantasy, but could they at least be consistent with the accents? Like, take Lord of the Rings. It's very clear. Rivendell elves sound like the royal family. Dwarves are all Scottish. It's at least decided and distinguished. In Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, all three brothers and the king's brother all have slightly different accents, and I know it's not important, but it just drove me slightly crazy. Next, I know I complimented a lot of the video game feeling sequences because they were the most stylistically interesting, and I don't take that back, but I do have to say one thing. The use of bullet time feels quite random. It's like I understand that in a lot of video games, especially games like Prince of Persia and Assassin's Creed, there are often moments in the gameplay, especially during boss fights, where the camera angles or like a small cinematic will play during your actual gameplay. But in the movie, it sort of just felt like they were throwing it in at whatever points. And there were a few times where it worked really well, but overall, I would just tell them to like, not so much slow-mo. It's really taking away from your fight scenes. Onto the poisoned robe that burned the king to death. And I've already said in multiple places how much I hate this plot device contrivance. But what I haven't complained about is the acting. See, in professional wrestling, there is a term called selling, and to sell means to make it look like your opponent's attacks are actually hurting you. You are selling the performance that they are giving. Thank you, Super Patch Wolf. And damn, the king does not sell the burning robe at all. It is bad acting, and it was like open 1 second because it's a cloak, and then when he was trying to get it off, it was like they had zipped it closed, which, and like, anyways, I just think that this plot point was terrible on literally every level that it could have been terrible, and it needs to be gone. Here's a very, very small complaint. They shot a bunch of Lawrence of Arabia-esque desert B-roll sweeping shots of the sand, and none of them seem to fit the vibe of the movie. They always feel out of place. In fact, I suspect that Mike Newell forced the editors to put a bunch of those scenes into the movie because I just cannot fathom a world in which a professional editor with a movie that is almost 2 hours long would choose to keep all of these random sweeping desert shots that serve no purpose whatsoever. I think that Mike Newell was just really proud of them. Here's one for the graphic designers. That text that comes up on screen when it says Lair of the Hasansins, they use Papyrus. I know. Please, everybody, stop using Papyrus in your commercial products. Seriously, I don't care if it's Egypty looking, Middle East looking. Stop using Papyrus, okay? Stop. Finally, and perhaps this is a result of me just not playing the Prince of Persia games, but I felt like the whole purpose of the dagger was really poorly explained. Like, don't get me wrong, I understood Tamina's story about the gods and everything, but why would they gift the little girl the dagger? Like, what good did that do? Like, it's the one thing that could bring on the apocalypse. I just why? I mean, the dagger is the gameplay mechanic. I get it. Like, that's not the part I'm complaining about. I just feel like they could have tried a little harder to explain like an in-universe reason for why they have it. Also, hey, did you guys know that the reason that that mechanic exists in the game was actually just because the developers didn't want to have to restart a level every time they screwed up during QA testing, so they just programmed in a button that would send the player back 30 seconds. That's pretty cool, right? That it was just like a debugger tool that ended up being like the core mechanic of the game. I think that's really cool. Number 6, some kind of conclusion. So when I set out to make this video, I really just wanted to defend the Prince of Persia movie as what I think is the only really enjoyable video game movie adaptation that's out there. I mean, like, the Silent Hill movie is okay, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a great adaptation. It's just like an okay horror movie. Anyway, I sat down to rewatch it to make sure that I had all the points that I wanted to make. And as I was watching it, I just got angrier and angrier and more bitter that this wasn't the Assassin's Creed movie that we got because, man, that Assassin's Creed movie broke my heart. And this movie, like, Assassin's Creed is so much more popular than Prince of Persia, I think. So why couldn't they have lifted, like, everything from this movie and just given us that as I'm sorry. Also, in my research, I came across a lot of people saying that Assassin's Creed is the spiritual successor to the Prince of Persia games, but I think maybe that's a bit of a stretch. I mean, yes, they're both made by Ubisoft, and yes, they're both third-person action games, and other than that, they're really different. The gameplay styles are so different that I never really connected them as being spiritual successors. I was kind of disappointed when I read that actually because I thought the idea for this video was so original, but I guess a lot of people have already sort of connected the two. That's okay. I'm here to make my case to those people as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope that you got some joy out of listening to my wildly underqualified opinions and suggestions, at least as much joy as I got out of making it. And because I'm someone who hyperfixates on ideas and then gets really into them and creative about it, I decided to take both the trailers for the Assassin's Creed movie and Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, and I cut them together to make a new trailer. Here it is.
I've seen its power with my own eyes. I understand it's your birthday. Yeah. The party's just getting started.